Hi everyone, and welcome back to the final episode of our National Careers Week podcasts. Today we are focusing on sort of acing an interview. So we're going to kind of go through any useful tips that we have for kind of prepping for an interview, all the way through the kind of questions you might be asked, and hopefully you'll pick up some kind of top tips along the way. So the first thing to think about then when you get your invite through for an interview, whether it's for a job, an apprenticeship, it could be, any role, the first thing you want to do is prep for that interview. So make sure you've obviously read the exact date and time that your interview's at, and you know when you're kind of aiming for. I would always say it sounds like such a kind of minor detail and it might not be top of everyone's list, but think about what you're actually going to wear for that interview. Obviously, if you haven't got, the correct clothes that you'd want to wear for an interview, then you'll need time to go out and obviously buy some, have a little look around. Obviously, that can sometimes take longer than you hope. So leave plenty of time to do that. And when you're kind of out, maybe shopping for a new outfit, always make sure you've left time to try it on as well. There's nothing worse than kind of getting up in the morning, putting your clothes on and thinking, oh my God, I hate it, or they don't fit quite right. So make sure you've kind of done a little dress rehearsal, I guess, before you go and you're happy with your outfit and nice and comfortable. You then want to make sure you know where you're going. So as I said, when you see you've got your interview invite through, it might say, it's an invite or an interview for a specific college, say, or university or organisation. You probably know generally where that is, but just make sure you double check in the address on the invite. It could be that they have another campus day that you didn't really know about, or it might be that the interview isn't actually at the place where you'll be working. So double check the address, and you can always pop it in things like Google Maps, and that'll tell you exactly how long it'll take you to get there by car or public transport or walking. You can put in like the exact time that you want to arrive by, and it'll kind of give you a pretty good estimate on there. With that, obviously leave yourself plenty of time, so it's always better to arrive in the general area sort of early. You could then maybe grab yourself coffee before the interview, have a little wander, kind of clear your head before you go in. But the last thing you want to do is kind of be rushing and all stressed before you even get into the interview room. So yeah, give yourselves plenty of time. And I would always say sort of head to the reception, maybe sort of 10-15 minutes before your interview, but not too much earlier, and obviously not much later, because you want to look like you've got excellent time management skills, and yeah, you've got plenty of time to prepare. So I think in terms of kind of prepping for the interview as a whole, that would be kind of my top tips. I think we're now going to move on to actually thinking about the content of the interview, and I know you've got some really useful advice, Jess, so it's over to you.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, when you think about the content of the interview, that's another kind of key step in making sure you're really prepared before you go. So something I would always advise is having a really good kind of trawl through the company website. So whether it is kind of a job interview and having a look through, like I said, the company website, or maybe if you're applying for a university course, then having a good look at kind of what exactly is involved with the degree, or even if kind of it's for a kind of a college course or something like that, you might be having an interview for one of those. But again, kind of just having a really good look through and seeing exactly what is involved with the job or the course or anything. So I think as well, if it is for a job, also having a good look at the person specification. So when you applied for the job, you will have kind of had a look at that. Just to see exactly what would be required of you, kind of if you were to fulfill that position. So it's just, again, kind of having a look at that person's specification, comparing it with the job description, and having to think about the skills that you have that kind of match up with that. So I think it's really important to remember kind of the person specification is there for a reason. And that person specification will often make up kind of a considerable part of the job interview itself, because the interviewer will be kind of going through that spec and thinking, right, what questions can I ask this person to make sure they fulfill kind of the requirements of the role? Very similarly, kind of having a look at university courses, and having a look at the content, and just seeing kind of what do you think the employer or the interviewer will ask about that particular course, and what sort of questions do you think they're going to ask you kind of about your interest in the subject and things like that. So I think my biggest advice, like I said, would be to have a really good trawl through the websites, and just check you absolutely understand kind of everything that is involved with the role or the course.
Yeah, excellent. I would totally agree with that. And I think once you've sort of thought about the content, I would then start and think about general questions that sort of come up in the majority of interviews. So I know most interviews that I've ever been for, there's always questions about, you know, when have you demonstrated sort of leadership skills? It might be things about sort of communication skills, teamwork, leadership. All of those sort of things always come up, no matter what it is you're going for. You know, the majority of job roles, or obviously courses that you might want to go on to, will involve some element of sort of teamwork, leadership, communicating with other people. Was it still on? Oh God, my Zoom's just closed. I thought it had gone off. Right,
no.
We'll have to start. Right, I'll start again from. What was I saying? Yeah. Should I start the whole thing again? Will that be easier?
Yeah, just start that bit again.
Right. Yeah, so I would totally agree with that. I think that's some excellent advice. And what I would say, sort of once you've started to think about the content of sort of your research around the employer or the organisation and your job role, I would start and think about common questions that always sort of come up in interviews. They're generally based around kind of your skills. Like Jess mentioned, you know, might be using sort of the personal spec. They'll probably outline some key skills that they're looking for in there. But generally, whether you're applying for employment or whether it is, you know, a course at university, college, apprenticeships, there'll generally be elements of sort of teamwork, leadership, kind of communicating with others. So in the interview, they generally ask questions about when you've demonstrated those skills. So with that, I would say before you go in, just prepare some answers. Obviously, you know, you want to have them so they kind of just roll off your tongue. You don't need to kind of put too much thought into those questions because you've already got the examples kind of ready in your head. You don't want to sound like a robot, obviously reading them off, but just have them there so you kind of know what you're going to come out with if they do come up. When you're kind of planning your answers for those, I would plan them with a bit of structure. So usually if it is, say they're asking about kind of teamwork, you might want to have an example in your head of a situation that you've been in, where you've been involved in some really excellent teamwork. And we would sort of advise that you use the STAR technique from that. You might have heard of that before, but it's a really good technique to kind of structure your answers. So with that, the STAR sort of method stands for situation. So what was the situation you were in? You can just give, you know, a really brief description of what it was. Your task, so what was your role? What did you need to do within that situation? The action from that, so what did you do? And then obviously what was the result as well. So they're really good ones to sort of, it's a really good structure, to use when you're answering sort of situation-based questions, and they're generally around, like I said, skills that you might use for the job. So yeah, it's worth preparing a few examples before you go in, and it's one less thing to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you mentioned, obviously it's great to be prepared and it's great to have these answers kind of in the back of your head. But do make sure, obviously, like you mentioned, they're not kind of coming out robotic and you're not trying to kind of remember exactly what it was that you'd wrote down. It's got to roll off the tongue and it's got to feel natural. Having that kind of preparation and kind of thinking ahead about what might possibly come up is really wise, and it's a really great thing to do. But obviously you don't want to kind of come across as flustered. Maybe if a question you thought would come up doesn't, and then you're a little bit thrown off. Obviously the questions that come up will be completely up to the interviewer. And sometimes they do kind of throw curveballs at you as well, which is what I did just kind of want to touch on off the back of that. So sometimes interviewers might ask questions that do feel really difficult. And obviously, as Danielle mentioned, a lot of the time they'll be talking about things like teamwork, leadership, communication, and those sorts of things. But I've definitely been in interviews where I've been asked questions that are a little bit different to that. So one of the kind of more common ones is, what is your greatest weakness? And obviously, upon first hearing that, you think, well, this is a lose-lose situation, because if I tell them what my weakness is, they won't want to take me on for the job. But if I don't, then I'm not answering the question. So it can feel like a bit of a difficult question to answer. I think the best way to properly answer this type of interview question is to focus on being really self-aware and honest, and kind of have a bit of like a plan for improvement. So I think sometimes with this question, obviously I can't kind of tell you guys what your biggest weakness might be. But what I can say is it's probably not a good idea to answer this question by saying, yeah, I'm really unorganized. Because obviously the employer is going to think, well, we don't want to take someone on who's really unorganized. It might be sometimes it could be maybe you have trouble letting go of a project, or maybe you don't like to say no to people, which I know I can be a little bit like that. But kind of you could state your kind of greatest weakness, but then be really reflective on how you're going to improve that. So if your weakness is, for example, that you have trouble saying no to people, you could say, I'm very aware that kind of that can be a problem, because I can become kind of overwhelmed by my workload if I say yes to too many projects. So you can then kind of move on from that and be dedicated to improvement by saying, as I'm aware of that, I will make sure kind of going forward that I only take on projects that I can manage. So if you can see there, you've kind of been really self-aware, you're answering the question, you're giving them exactly what they've asked for, but you are also showing that kind of dedication to improvement as well. So I think that's kind of a way to answer that one. And just one more is, tell us about a time that you planned for something and it didn't work out the way you'd hoped, or some kind of variation of that. So I don't know, Danielle, if you kind of want to shed any light on how you'd answer that question.
Yeah, I think that's always it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because again, it almost feels like you don't want to put yourself down and say, oh, well, I planned all of this and then it really didn't work out at all. For me, I think the key would be saying, really highlighting like how well you did plan for the event. What did you do? Really, like, as I say, stress what you did plan. Maybe just use that kind of STAR technique to structure your answer in terms of your actions and what actually happened. But I would say kind of really highlight that you had a sort of an action plan if it didn't go right. So you had a backup, and then you can explain, obviously, you used your backup and everything was hopefully all right. But yeah, I would say just stress how much you planned originally. Say you did have a plan B, and that's kind of highlighted the importance for you going forward of always having a bit of a contingency plan in case anything kind of crops up. But yeah, again, just being aware that you're not completely sort of slating what happened and sort of how you manage the situation, always make it into a positive. So yes, it didn't go to plan, but actually you came up with a bit of a backup in it and it still worked out all right.
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of in that sort of question as well, using the keywords of being adaptable and flexible, because that's what employers look for. They want someone who can kind of problem solve and think on their feet. And I think showing that you are kind of happy to deal with things when they maybe don't go right or don't go as you expected is a real strength. So kind of showing that you're adaptable is really great. And obviously, even if kind of it still didn't really turn out great in the end, I think showing that you've then used that experience again to kind of improve going forward, being really self-aware. I think it's all about honesty, but obviously not giving too much away. So I think that's kind of the best way to answer those sorts of questions, definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's kind of getting the balance, isn't it, of accepting what happened and really stressing that you learned from it. But yeah, that is, I think, kind of a summary of our top tips for acing an interview. So just to kind of summarize, preparation really, really is key. So whether that is just planning out what shoes you're going to wear, where you're actually going, or making sure that you really do your research into the actual role you're going for, the company, and prepping for any kind of questions that might crop up as well. I think that is preparation really is the key, as I say. So as long as you're prepared, you'll go in feeling confident that you're going to have the answers, and hopefully that'll take away a bit of the nerves as well, because I know it is quite a nerve-wracking experience, especially if you're sort of a student at the minute, maybe it's year 11 or so, you might not have experienced many interviews, so just try not to feel too nervous. But yeah, hopefully that's been useful, and you've kind of picked up some top tips along the way. We'll also be putting on a how to create a CV session this afternoon. So that will be from 3:30 until 4 p.m. So please do tune into that. And again, we'll give you some top tips about kind of putting together a CV. We will post the link in the description of this podcast as well. So please do book on if you would be interested in that this afternoon. And hopefully we'll see you all then. But thank you very much for listening.